A 27-year-old sex worker goes missing from the streets of Glasgow.
There had been 6 murders of sex workers within the Glasgow area in the preceding years.
This is a very, very dangerous trade because you don't know who you're going to meet, you don't know the individual, and you don't know what may happen.
When her body turns up in a remote part of Scotland, a major investigation gets underway.
They took about 8,000 statements and hundreds of DNA samples.
It was probably at that point the biggest murder investigation in the history of Strathclyde Police.
The decision was made to conduct 24-hour surveillance.
This surveillance is massively expensive and is a very complicated and complex procedure.
You have to be very sure that you're on the right track, that these are the people involved.
Limefield Woods, located near Biggar, South Lanarkshire in Scotland, is a peaceful woodland known for its picturesque walking trails.
Limefield Woods is a huge rural location. It's about an hour's drive away from Glasgow, about 43 miles, close to the villages of Roberton and the town of Biggar.
You can go in there at daylight and the light can just disappear because of the size of the trees and the denseness of the forest. The only people that will go there are people who live in the area or are walkers or go there for a specific reason. It's not somewhere you'll find just by chance by driving past. This is somewhere you would go to have a look at the wonderful area that it is.
It is a place that contrasts between day and night. During the day, it's peaceful, there's a feeling of serenity, it's tranquil, it's popular with dog walkers, it's beautiful scenery. At night, however, it's completely different. It becomes somewhere that's isolated and remote and quite frightening. It's pitch black and it's eerily silent.
30 miles away in the city of Glasgow, parents of a local woman become concerned when they are unable to reach their daughter in April 2005.
Emma Caldwell was the daughter of Willie and Margaret Caldwell.
Emma comes from a family of 2 girls. Emma, her sister, and her parents were very close and would stay in regular contact.
Emma had a really tragic thing happen to her when she was young, and that was that her older sister got cancer and sadly died. And it had a huge impact on Emma for the rest of her life.
Life had been fine up until then, whether that's through education or family life. Everything was great. Everything was what we would say, I suppose, that awful word normal, but it was. But losing her older sister really did change her.
Clearly, Emma found this such a traumatic time in her life that she turned to drugs, and subsequently she had a drug habit to fund.
Now, if you're not working, in the sense of having a regular salary, you've got to have this ready cash available, and that's going to be done in really a couple of ways. One, it's either through crime, or 2, in the case of many, many unfortunate women, they turn to prostitution.
For young women doing sex work on the street, it's extremely dangerous. They are extremely vulnerable. They leave themselves open to physical attack, to rape, even murder. They are targeted and they are abused.
The majority of the time, these women will have something that has happened to them in their past, whether it's their childhood or, you know, in their teenage years. Quite often, if you actually go to an area where there are on-street sex workers, you will see a pimp in the background. You might not realise that's who he is, but there will be a pimp in the background somewhere. And they're working them, and they're taking the money from them. They're giving them enough so they can fund their drug habit, but then they're sending them back out on the streets again to fund their next hit of drugs. And it's a brutal, hard, cruel life.
The fact that a prostitute works on the street, the fact that it's illegal means it's undercover. The fact is that they don't have the protection that other countries offer. then this is a very, very dangerous trade, because you don't know who you're going to meet, you don't know the individual, and you don't know what may happen.
Struggling with drug addiction and wanting to protect her parents from its impact, 27-year-old Emma Caldwell left her family home and had been living in a women's hostel in central Glasgow.
On Monday, the 4th of April 2005, Emma Caldwell leaves the hostel that she was living in on Inglefield Street to go to the streets to do her job as a sex worker.
This is the last time she is seen alive.
The first people to really think there's something amiss within Emma's life were her parents. About 2 days after she was last seen, her mother was phoning her and there was no response, which was unusual because they would speak on the phone every day.
Even though Emma had left home and Emma was working as a prostitute, she was still in regular contact with her parents.
Emma made a point of seeing her parents at least twice a week, but she would have spoken to her mother Margaret 2 or 3 times every single day. On Wednesday, the 6th of April, Emma's father attempted to phone her, but she did not pick up, and he made a remark to his wife Margaret that maybe Emma was unwell.
The mother was so concerned regarding this that she attended the following Saturday the hostel where she lived. She made inquiries there, she knocked on the door, but she wasn't there.
The next day, the Sunday, they made the decision to contact the police and report Emma as a missing person.
Of course, we've now got the situation that 1, Emma is an adult, 2, she is a prostitute. Now, even in those days, many police forces around the whole of the UK may not take that seriously because of what they would say at the time was, well, that's the life she's chosen, I'm sure she'll turn up. So a lot of the time these reports would be taken or taken down and be shown as reported, but there won't be too much that the police would have been doing at that stage.
One of the things that the police would be particularly interested in, and it would set alarm bells and elevate this investigation, is that she didn't collect her methadone.
A lot of drug addicts, particularly heroin addicts, will have methadone, which is a substitute, which is when they're trying to wean them off drugs, or when they're trying to, themselves realise they have an issue and they want to be weaned off drugs. And part of that is that they have a methadone prescription. To get that methadone prescription, they have to go to a chemist, and it's a specific chemist. They have a certain time of day they have to turn up for this methadone. They have to take the methadone there and then in front of the chemist. And if somebody doesn't turn up for their methadone, something's not right.
Emma's family, friends, and the police become increasingly concerned for her welfare.
There was a lot of things that weren't adding up. Emma's routine was different because she hadn't been out in the streets. None of her colleagues had seen her. Obviously, her family had never heard anything from her in those days. No phone calls, no meetings, nothing. So everything had stopped. Her life just seemed to have stopped completely. So police were suspicious that she had come to some harm.
As time went on, days turned into weeks of Emma being missing. The police really then started to become more and more concerned, so much so that they warned her parents that they might have to prepare themselves for the worst.
5 weeks after her disappearance, Emma's parents' worst fears come true.
On Sunday the 8th of May, a dog walker in Limefield Woods discovered the body of Emma Caldwell. The police found Emma's body in a shallow ditch within Limefield Woods. She was naked.
And of course, we've now got the situation. She's 43 miles from Glasgow, last spotted on CCTV going to work. There is absolutely no reason for her to be there. Why was she there in the first place? Was her body taken there, or was she led there? In which case she must have been driven there by somebody who knows the area quite well.
The investigation into Emma Caldwell's murder quickly becomes a high-profile case for the police.
There had been 6 murders of sex workers within the Glasgow area in the preceding years. So it was probably at that point the biggest murder investigation in the history of Strathclyde Police.
What investigators didn't know at the time was that disagreements over suspects and internal politics within the Strathclyde Task Force would significantly complicate the search for the killer. Five weeks after 27-year-old Emma Caldwell disappeared in Glasgow, her naked body is discovered on May 8, 2005, in Limefield Woods, a woodland area 30 miles south of Glasgow, near Biggar, Scotland. Police were now faced with the difficult task of informing her next of kin.
As a police officer, whether in uniform or as a detective, to give a death message is probably the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. And in many cases, just by turning up when it's a missing person case, you turn up at the door and you knock on it, the minute they see you, they know it's bad news.
Emma's parents had the unfortunate task of identifying Emma's body in the mortuary. They were devastated because they had already lost one daughter, and now they were losing their other daughter in such a cruel way.
The natural landscape of where Emma's body was found poses difficulties for crime scene investigators.
It is a forest, it's full of trees. It's not going to be the easiest place to search.
There are a number of steps that you need to go through. Firstly, you obviously have to forensically examine as best you can, under the circumstances, the body whilst it's in situ. You would obviously conduct a search of the surrounding areas, and this is specialist police search teams on their hands and knees, shoulder to shoulder, and literally fingertip searching until they find anything unusual.
And of course, in this instance, one thing that was discovered around her neck was a piece of wire, which becomes very crucial in the investigation.
The post-mortem revealed that Emma had been the victim of strangulation, and there were markings on her neck consistent with the length of cable that had been found underneath her neck.
With the murder investigation underway, Strathclyde Police assemble a task force.
Each investigation in the UK is given an operation name. In this instance, Emma's murder, the investigation into it was known as Operation Grail, and that consisted of about 50 officers. They took about 8,000 statements and hundreds of DNA samples. So this was a huge inquiry.
The nature of Emma's work makes lines of inquiry difficult to establish.
They come in contact with very, very many people that don't really want to be identified. And so even the sex worker themselves probably doesn't know these people, doesn't know their names, doesn't know where they live, and that's why it becomes really problematic.
Police begin their search with the people closest to Emma.
Well, first of all, the police obviously spoke to Emma's family. They tried to get as much information from her family as possible, what kind of person Emma was, and basically her whole backstory as a human being. They then spoke to people in the hostel who knew Emma, and then they obviously made their way to speaking to other sex workers on the streets of Glasgow's red light district who would have knew Emma and would have knew her habits, her movements, and things like that. So they were basically casting as big a net out as possible to speak to as many people as possible to get as much information about Emma and her movements to try and find out who killed her.
The senior investigating officer, Willie Johnston, makes a number of public appeals for information on Emma's murder.
They were appealing to the public. They were appealing to punters who may well have remembered Emma, who may well have, been with Emma. They wanted as many people to come forward and give as much of a detailed description about Emma and her life as possible. They also had billboards with Emma Caldwell's face on it, saying that they were looking for any information. This was really because a lot of people would have seen Emma as a sex worker, and that's all they would have seen. They wouldn't have seen beyond that. They wouldn't have seen that she was somebody's daughter. She had a sister who died of cancer. She was a human being, and this was trying to make and help people to see her as a human being and not just a sex worker.
Through speaking with Emma's colleagues, police get their first significant lead.
The police had a very interesting conversation with a sex worker who knew Emma quite well. This woman told police that there was one particular client who, in her words, was obsessed with Emma. This client would hide out behind some billboards, and if another client tried to talk to Emma or engage with Emma, he would drive his van at full speed past them to try and intimidate them, to try and scare them off, almost that he was the only one that was allowed to engage with Emma.
And not only that, she had told the other ladies that he'd raped her. So investigators now started to build up potentially a suspect here, someone who's fixating on Emma, has used violence, sexual violence against her, and he's described as driving a van that's been seen in that area. So police now had somebody they could start to focus in on.
Investigators quickly locate the distinct vehicle described by the sex workers.
Detectives were able to identify a van that was likely to be being used by this man, and it had some writing down the side that said Alpha Beta Sign Services.
The police were suspicious of this individual. One of the reasons why was because one of the detectives on the case used to work as a repairman for neon signs. He noticed that the cable that was found under Emma's neck, that one end of it was damaged, almost as if it had been burnt. And from his experiences, he thought that's the kind of thing that could have happened through repairing a sign. And he thought, could there be a connection between the cable and this man and his line of work?
So suddenly, you got an awful lot of information, not evidence at this stage, but a lot of good information saying, well, this individual, whoever drives her, whoever owns that van, definitely worth questioning.
On the 22nd of June 2005, police identified that the man they were looking for was Ian Packer. So a decision would need to be made. How do we speak to this person? Do we speak to them as a witness or speak to them as a suspect? If they're spoken to as a suspect, they would need to be cautioned, and they would need to be done under certain circumstances. The police decided they would speak to him as a witness.
They go to this man's house the next morning at 7:30 in the morning. He's getting up, getting ready to go to work. He is the director of a signs company, and they ask him, have you ever used prostitutes? Have you ever been in the red light district? Things of that nature. He denies using sex workers. He denies being a regular in the red light district, and he is very much given the impression that this has nothing to do with him, that he is just an ordinary guy.
Fortunately, the detective at the time did take a picture of him. In most cases, if you deal with somebody as a suspect, you take fingerprints, you take DNA. That wasn't the case. He's been dealt with as a witness. So this detective had the thought, I'll take the picture and just to find out. And of course, then they had a picture they could take back to some of the witnesses who worked with Emma to say, is this the individual that you've told us about?
So they showed 12 photographs of men to these girls and asked them whether the person who they described as fixated with Emma is amongst them. And he was. They identified Ian Packer as being that man.
A background check on Packer revealed more incriminating information.
During this investigation, a number of women who were also sex workers came forward to say that they knew Ian Packer, and they described him as someone that was quite scary. They described him as someone who could get very aggressive, very angry, someone that was reluctant to use protection, someone that would force them to strip off all of their clothing. And if They didn't do that. He would get very angry and he would do things like stomp his feet and raise his voice, and just not a nice guy, to the point that they actually had come up with a book called the Beware Book, and within that they had the names of clients that they were warning other working girls to stay away from, and Ian Packer's name was put in that book quite a few times, as well as an alias he had used called Peter.
You've got so much evidence now coming from these wonderful witnesses who said, this is the man who is sexually violent towards us, and we believe he is responsible for the death of Emma. We know he's actually goes to certain areas. We know what he's like. So there's so much evidence being put together that these detectives think they've got the right guy. They've got the guy that's been driving the van. They've got the guy that has actually possibly been involved with some sort of cable involved with neon lights, and they've got these witnesses saying he has previous for being violent towards women on the street.
Obviously, the investigation team would be quite excited by this, and they would take the next logical step, and that is to arrest and take him into custody. This would obviously have to be approved by the SIO, and in this particular case, the SIO decided that that was not the course of action that they were going to take.
They were instructed by the SIO not to treat this individual as a suspect. And of course, as a junior officer, you respect the decision of a SIO, but it makes you wonder why.
What they don't know is behind the scenes there is a separate inquiry into the murder, and 4 suspects have been identified. Strathclyde police are investigating the murder of Emma Caldwell, whose body was discovered in the remote Limefield Woods near Biggar, Scotland, on the 8th of May 2005. Authorities have identified a strong suspect, Ian Packer, a man known for his violent behaviour towards sex workers, and is reported to have been obsessed with Caldwell. However, detectives are unaware that there is a parallel, covert murder investigation underway.
Some detectives working in Operation Grail went to interview people, and when they went to interview them as witnesses, they were told, "We've already been spoken to." And the detectives were a bit perplexed at this and goes, "Really?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, we've had someone just, been here recently and spoken to me." And the detectives would ring back to the police station and inquire and be told, "Oh no, they haven't been spoken to." But the witnesses were absolutely insistent they have been spoken to. It then transpires that alongside Operation Grail, there is a secret unit working on the Emma Caldwell investigation called Operation Guard.
There was a whole different strand to the investigation that they weren't being told about.
For me, it's unprecedented in the sense that I've not known that. If you've got one operation running, that's that operation, even if it might coincide or conflict with another one, but you're both aware of both operations. You don't keep an operation within an operation secret from police officers, because you're going to get the conflict of interest and the conflict of evidence. You can't do it that way.
DCI Colin Field holds a briefing in the morning with DS Willie Johnson and all the detectives from Operation Grail and Operation Guard, and he tells all the detectives what they've been doing, what they've been working on. We understand that you were interested in Ian Packer, but this is where we're heading, and this is why we're heading.
The details of Operation Guard's line of inquiry was revealed to be in relation to a Turkish man that had called Emma's phone.
The last phone call made to Emma's phone on the night of Monday the 4th of April 2005 was a 70-second phone call from a man called Abu Bakr Onku. He was a Turkish man, and he had rang Emma that night, the night of her murder.
And of course, in many, many murder cases that you deal with, the last person that had contact with the victim tends to be the murderer.
Further examination of cell phone data reveals that the night of Emma's disappearance, one of her last known locations was near a Turkish cafe.
So now there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, not evidence pointing to a murderer or a suspect, but there's circumstantial evidence that the SIO's taken on board to think, right, it's got to have something to do with that cafe, because we've got the phone, Emma's phone, near the location, and we've got Onku that we've now got. We know he was the last person to make contact or try to make contact with Emma, and we've got the location. So let's now concentrate on looking at the cafe, because they know that that's also a cafe that's frequented by women and prostitutes. So that's where the line of inquiry then was strengthened.
Onku was questioned by detectives, and he denied that he had seen Emma that night. He couldn't recall making the phone call. He couldn't recall what they had spoken about, but he denied any knowledge of her murder or the events that led up to her death. But he did concede that he had had a previous intimate encounter with Emma Caldwell.
Detectives on Operation Guard felt this was enough evidence to focus all their efforts on the Turkish man and his comrades.
The decision was made to conduct 24-hour surveillance on the cafe, which would include visual surveillance and also audio surveillance. And this would entail putting listening devices, or bugs if you like, inside the premises so that they could listen to conversations.
This surveillance is massively expensive. Not only is it time-consuming, but finding people to follow people 24 hours a day, to fund the bugging of rooms, of people's phones. It is a huge undertaking, cost-wise, but also in terms of manpower, and is a very complicated and complex procedure.
To get that type of clearance to start that kind of a surveillance and investigation is a massive step, but you have to be very sure that you're on the right track. You have to be able to demonstrate that these are the people involved. We really believe strongly they're involved, and we want to gather more evidence. So you have to convince further up the line that this is why you're doing it, that there is a valid reason for doing it, and that you're confident that you will get some reward at the end to build a case against these people.
Meanwhile, detectives on Operation Grail continued their investigation into Ian Packer.
They speak to another of the sex workers who says that she's been taken to a remote area by one of her customers. They then decided to conduct another lineup with this particular sex worker. And again, she picked out Ian Packer.
And she said that Ian Packer was someone who would have picked her up on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. And she said on one occasion he took her outside of Glasgow to a very remote location, at least an hour's drive away. And the police asked her, could she retrace that route? They were very interested in knowing exactly where Ian Packer took her. And when they were going on the route, she was telling the police things she remembered, and lo and behold, the more they went on the route, those things came to be true. She told them that she noticed a bus stop that she took note of, because she said that Packer was taking her so far that she at one point was going to jump out at the bus stop to escape, because he was getting very nervous because he was going so far off the beaten track. She then noticed that at one stage they went over something that made like a dun-dun-dun-dun type noise. Well, that turned out to be a cattle grid. She eventually took them to the exact spot. And she described seeing Christmas trees on either side of the road, as she described them. And she said she remembers them going up to a silver gate. And she said this was the point that Packer stopped the van. Just to the left of that spot is where Emma Caldwell's body was found.
So now we have another woman who, working as a prostitute, has been taken to this area by the person that she's named as Ian Packer, and it just so happens that that's the same location as Emma. This cannot be a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence, and yet it still wasn't acted on.
They're directed from above to say, Ian Packer is not our man. Ian Packer will never be charged over this. This is not the direction we are heading in.
You just get the feeling that the SIO is thinking, no, I want to forget that guy, because the more I've got the distraction of people talking about Ian Packer, I'm trying to gain on the individuals who I believe are responsible for it from the Turkish cafe. So he tells the officers straight away, go and speak to him as a witness and tell him that is it. We don't need him any longer. He's free to carry on his own business.
But when detectives visit Packer to tell him he is eliminated as a suspect, he makes a shocking admission.
Now he admits to everything. Yes, he does know Emma. He has met Emma. He does use prostitutes, but he didn't hurt her. He's non-violent, and he sticks to that type of the story. But now we go back and you think these detectives must be sitting there thinking, wow, hang on. You've gone from lying to us to driving that van, being possibly associated with the cable. We've got witnesses who've put you at the location. We've got witnesses who say you're a violent individual who's raped some of the prostitutes. And now you're admitting to knowing Emma and having been with her.
Based on Packer's confession, detectives on Operation Grail make a tactical decision.
Now they asked Packer to take them to the area where he takes the girls. And he took them to exactly the same area. He was within yards of where Emma's body was found. Now, for those officers, it would have been almost a surreal moment. Here's somebody that we suspect as being the killer, and he's actually taken us to the site where the body was dumped. So these detectives now had a decision to make, essentially. In their minds, they already suspected that Packer was the killer. Now him taking them to the deposition site, that can only firm that up. How can it not be him? How can all this evidence pointed to him not be right? In their minds, they're thinking, are we missing something? Are we going crazy? We need to take this to the bosses, so that's what they did. Packer has taken us to the deposition site, a deposition site that we ourselves struggled to find. What came back was the same thing. No, leave him alone. It's not him. We've got the right people. It is not Packer. I can't even begin to imagine the frustrations of those officers, good detectives, good experienced officers that in their minds would have been absolutely convinced at this point, but were being told by senior officers, no, you're wrong.
The senior investigating officer orders the detectives pursuing Packer to stand down, asserting that they have damning evidence from translated audio recordings captured during the surveillance of the Turkish cafe.
During these conversations, a casino was mentioned, and in fact the casino was next door to the premises. They searched the casino, and in the casino they found clothing that they believed to be Emma's.
And they also found a little key ring with a horse on it, which was interesting because Emma had previously worked at the stables as a young girl. Police were convinced that these clothing and items did belong to Emma Caldwell.
Their final piece of evidence was found within the cafe.
The police, when they were searching the Turkish Community Cafe, found some bed linen, and on that bed linen they found 2 specks of blood. That blood was found to belong to Emma Caldwell. So there were a number of things that made the police very confident that these Turkish men were involved and ordered them to be arrested.
One of the officers who strongly suspected Packer as being Emma's killer was given the task of interviewing Onku, which essentially involved him playing the recordings from the cafe. Recordings that he had been told had been translated by the best in the business. But when they played this recording to Onku, he started to laugh at them, saying that what you're telling me on there isn't true, almost ridiculing the product, ridiculing the officer, putting him in a really awkward position.
The problem was the quality of the audio recordings weren't great, and the detective himself had to concede that it sounded like a bunch of men sitting around a television chatting. There was just nothing really decipherable there. Basically, he went out and told the SIO that and told his superiors, I'm not convinced this is right. And they said, well, he's our man, go back and charge him. So he did so.
After £4 million had been spent on the investigation into Emma Caldwell's murder, the most expensive murder inquiry ever in Scotland, the 4 Turkish men are charged with the crime. The pressure is on to secure a conviction, but some detectives are convinced the killer is still walking free. On May 8, 2005, the body of 27-year-old Emma Caldwell was discovered in a remote woodland 30 miles south of Glasgow, 5 weeks after she disappeared. Strathclyde police charged 4 Turkish men with her murder following a major surveillance operation at their cafe, making it Scotland's most expensive murder investigation.
Police seek authority to charge the 4 men with Emma's murder, and that's granted. So they're now going to stand trial for Emma's murder. And the defence team would have to look at the evidence and essentially question it, test it. And the main part of the evidence were these recordings from the cafe. Worryingly, what transpired was the experts that the senior officers had used to transcribe the recordings were in fact Turkish-speaking officers whose grasp of Turkish actually wasn't fluent.
One of the police officers, whilst he was of Turkish descent, he only had an O-level in the subject of the Turkish language. Another officer, again of Turkish descent, had to confess that his knowledge of the language was, at best, limited. So it was far from the best experts in the land.
Independent translators are brought in to transcribe the recordings in preparation for the trial.
The independent experts come in, they listen to the recordings, and they say, what is alleged to have been said here is not obvious. We can't say that this is what is being said. It's quite clear that none of this is being said. The other situation was that, yes, Emma Caldwell's blood was found in the Turkish cafe, but you have to remember that police knew that sex workers had been taken there in the past. That does not necessarily prove that she was killed there. The other issue in regards to the clothing and keyring found at the casino, they were never 100% confirmed to belong to Emma Caldwell. The police found them and put 2 and 2 together and thought, well, these have to be Emma's, but they were never independently verified as having belonged to Emma Caldwell.
At this point, obviously, that line of inquiry has completely collapsed, which is unusual because, generally speaking, all the evidence is checked and double-checked to make sure that we've got it right. This strand of the inquiry collapsed very, very quickly.
You've now got the whole situation here that you've got the money being spent. £4 million that have been spent on this operation alone, not the original Operation Grail. So what do? We've got the wrong people, we've got no evidence, it's fallen through, what do? It's quite an embarrassment for that SIO.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's not like this was built on no foundations. This was built on some foundation. The problem was that it went further than what it should have. If the police had got the independent experts in at an earlier stage to make the translations and to transcribe the audio recordings, and if they had turned around and said, this is not going to get to court, we can't hear anything, this is not what is being said, this is inaccurate, it may not have went as far.
The situation now was that the evidence they had against these 4 men was essentially rubbished, meaning that the case against them collapsed. They were now to be released.
It is strange and questionable as to when the Turkish men are eliminated and exonerated as suspects, that they didn't return to the alternative in a very strong suspect, in Ian Packer. That in itself is strange, because there was so much pointing to Packer.
Though suspicion remains towards Packer, nothing happens for almost 15 years.
In 2019, Ian Packer approaches the BBC and he approaches a well-known journalist called Samantha Poling, and he wants to tell his side of the story. He wants to clear his name, and he feels her interviewing him is the best way to achieve that.
In the production of this particular documentary, Ian Packer decides that he will voluntarily appear and openly admits that he knows Emma, openly admits that he uses prostitutes, but says he has never been violent towards them, and he certainly has never raped any of them.
If Ian Packer had been raised as a suspect by detectives originally, one of the processes that they would go through is to build up a picture of his life, trying to understand if there's a pattern of behaviour. That didn't take place because he wasn't raised as a suspect. But those making the documentary went through that process, trying to build up that picture of him.
What Samantha Poling did was Samantha Poling went and spoke to as many people as she could about Ian Packer. And far from a man who denied being sexually violent or abusive to women, who had never raped a woman, who had never hurt a woman, she found a truckload of circumstantial evidence from people who had had experiences with Ian Packer, very negative experiences. One sex worker told her that Ian Packer had got her inside his van and had attempted to strangle her, and she was only saved when a security guard banged on the van and she managed to escape. Another one told about being taken behind some shops. Ian Packer had tried to force her onto her knees and she managed to escape, and when she was running in the street, Packer was running after her, shouting threats. She was building this picture of a very, very dangerous man. Someone that was controlling, someone that was aggressive, and someone that was violent.
A woman called Magdalene Roberts is interviewed as part of the documentary. She knew Packer when she was a child.
Ian Packer had become a friend to her family, and she had a very disturbing experience with Ian Packer to tell. She said that Packer would sexually harass her, and she's 14 years of age at this point. He would sexually harass her, he would intimidate her. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find him standing by her bed staring at her. That then escalates to him sexually assaulting Magdalene and eventually raping her in her own home. She told her family what had happened, and they basically said to her, you're making it up, or they didn't really believe her. But 10 months after the murder of Emma Caldwell, Magdalene Roberts reports her rape by Ian Packer to the police, and the police unfortunately do nothing with it.
On camera, Samantha Poling confronts Ian Packer with her findings. His decision to participate in the documentary would be his downfall.
Whilst he's happy to say, yes, I knew Emma, yes, I visit sex workers, what he's not expecting is the fact that, hang on a minute, we know you're violent, we know you're a rapist, we know that you've actually committed rape, we know that you actually raped a girl when she was 14. He is sitting there being hit with everything, and that must have taken him by surprise.
He was dumbfounded and really taken aback when she told him that she believed he was a dangerous man and that he was dangerous to women, and that he had lied to her, and that he had questions to answer regarding the death of Emma Caldwell.
Shortly after the documentary is published, 13 years after Emma's murder, an ex-partner of Packer comes forward and tells police that he had attacked her.
He actually was jailed for attacking his former partner. He then subsequently, post that, is charged with the murder of Emma Caldwell, and the interviews he gave to Samantha Poling form part of the evidence.
Ian, can you describe your relationship to me with Emma Caldwell? Could you provide a description of Emma to me? Can you confirm where and when you first met?
On the 28th of February 2022, Ian Packer was convicted of Emma's murder, and he was also convicted of 33 other counts relating to assaults, sexual assaults. And over his lifetime, he had targeted and attacked 22 women. Ian Packer was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years.
It has turned out that he has become one of the most prolific rapists and sex offenders in modern Scottish history.
He has put himself in the frame for a murder that he committed some many years ago, and I find it astonishing that he would do such a thing, and unbelievable.
When I look at Ian Packer, I see a sexual predator who was driven by his need for power and control over vulnerable women, sex workers, 14-year-old girl, people that he could easily prey on. And the fact that he was allowed to keep carrying on his crimes, he was almost emboldened. And I think that's the biggest tragedy here, of how many victims that fell foul of him when they didn't need to. For the family, they would have undoubtedly mixed feelings about his conviction. There would be that satisfaction that eventually someone has faced justice for Emma's murder, but he was allowed to live for that interim period. He was allowed out and about to live his life, a life that Emma will never lead.